Routinization and the rise of social complexity. The settlement at Katahoyak is just one early example of how the transition to agriculture gradually brought new forms of ritual and in turn larger cultural groups. Over time, these same processes would intensify, leading to much larger scale civilizations around the world. For example, one of the first large-scale complex societies in world history capable of unifying cities located hundreds of miles apart was the so-called Harappan civilization, which spread along the Indus Valley in what is now Pakistan, more than 4,500 years ago. One of the hallmarks of this society was an extraordinarily high degree of standardization, apparent in its iconography, and architecture and other indicators of shared beliefs and practices, especially ones associated with bodily purity and public sanitation. Harappan seals, used to mark paths in a highly consistent way across the civilization, provide a good example. Seals were designed in a virtually identical fashion across the entire empire, depicting a line of as yet undeciphered script along the top, a species of animal in the middle, and additional inscriptions along the bottom. Likewise, buildings were constructed in the same way across all Harappan cities, and flood defenses requiring labor forces of thousands constructed according to exactly the same principles of building control. You might imagine that such a degree of cultural homogeneity You might imagine that such a degree of cultural homogeneity will have required some kind of hierarchical system of government. Hierarchical.
Harappan civilization.
Okay. Likewise, Unlike many later empires, however, this early civilization appeared to lack a system of top-down administration and control. Harappan methods of town planning and water management will have required highly sophisticated forms of cooperation and coordination. But this did not seem to entail the system of social stratification with powerful leaders at the top and slaves at the bottom, nor was conformism enforced through military domination. The Harappans appear to lack armies or elaborate weaponry, being more interested in trading with surrounding groups and procuring luxury goods from other centers. Procure from other centers, such as in Mesopotamia, by peaceful means. In short, the force binding together Harappan culture seems to have been neither violence nor centrally organized bureaucracy, but routinized ritual. The high levels of standardization observed in this civilization suggest that its norms, beliefs, and practices were embedded in the repetitive practices of everyday life, particularly ones associated with cleansing and purification. Much like the people of Catahoyuk before them, and the East New Britain long after, Routinization arguably helped create a new cultural group, one larger than any that had existed in the region before. As rituals became more routinized and societies grew larger, more intense farming will have been needed to feed more densely settled populations. Some of the best evidence for this comes not just from archaeology, but from the ethnographic record. Ethnographic From the ethnographic record, when I moved from Belfast to Oxford in 2006, I brought with me a grant that was focused on explaining various patterns of recurrence and variation in the religious beliefs and practices of human societies in modern times. Because of my interest in the unifying effects of ritual routinization, a high priority of this project was to explore where and why high-frequency rituals appeared in cultural groups around the globe. Using this grant, I was able to hire a postdoctoral researcher, Quentin Atkinson, to work with me to build a database of rituals from the representative examples of world cultures and to measure their frequency and of performance and emotional intensity. Atkinson has mastered the statistical technique necessary to establish whether ritual frequency was indeed related to group size. With emotionally intense infrequent rituals, like the hunting feasting event at Catahoyuk, being associated with small groups and emotionally less intense day-to-day rituals. Like the increasing routinization of domestic rituals over time, being associated with larger groups such as I had hypothesized. To explore these ideas, Atkinson and I first set out to test whether infrequent and majestic rituals tend to be more emotionally intense, and frequent routinized rituals less so. To this end, we created a database encoding information on about 645 rituals from the sample of 74 contemporary cultures from around the world. We sourced this information from a massive repository of writings by ethnographers known as Human Relations Area Files, together with an additional information source known as the Ethnographic Atlas, which recorded much relevant information on an overlapping set of cultures pertaining to variables of interest such as group size and structure. From these sources, we extracted the information we need on the frequency of ritual performance, the emotional intensity, and the size of groups they occurred in, as well as various other features that we thought might be interesting to explore, including various aspects of economic life and subsistence strategy. When Atkinson completed his statistical analysis of the data, he revealed that, as predicted, rarely performed rituals tended to involve high levels of emotional intensity. But something even more exciting came out of the analysis of our rituals database. The discovery of routinization was associated with agricultural intensity. In other words, as societies become more dependent on farming, their rituals become more frequent. That's because agriculture means settled life, and agriculture means regular working hours and extra food, maybe. In turn, this finding triggered an even more challenging idea. Will we find similarly convincing quantitative quantitative evidence that the performance of more frequent rituals was enabling larger scale cultural groups among early farmers to stabilize and spread through history? This thorny question led archaeologist Mick Gantley to come up with a novel methodology that we termed material correlates analysis, or MCA for short. The MCA approaches was inspired by the rituals database that Atkinson and I had created using ethnographic writings as our source of information. That database had found a strong link between routinization and agriculture in contemporary cultures, but Gantley also set himself the task of finding out whether we could use this information to shed light on how ritual life was changing in our ancient past during the agricultural transition in Western Asia. The central ideas of the MCA approach is that there are numerous features of material life that are visible in the remains dug up at hundreds of ancient archaeological sites in the region of the world we want to survey. Achoo, achoo. Hey. Hey, shit. Hey. Shit. In the region of the world we wanted to survey. So even though there are many things we cannot see directly, we can at least compare well-documented features with those of society present in our sample of more or less contemporary societies in the rituals database. Doing so produced 90 features that could be compared directly from the observable archaeological remains and from the sample of extent.
Extant.
Extant. From a sample of extant ethnographic cultures. Such features included details of how food was produced and consumed, how communities were organized, and what sorts of rituals people were performing. This constituted our material correlates. Based on this methodology, it became possible to say which ancient societies more closely resembled which modern ones. It was only a short step from doing that to asking the question, which ancient societies are more like contemporary imagistic ones, such as codes of New Guinea tribes involving rare but emotionally intense initiations, and which societies more closely resemble the modern ones with more routinized rituals, such as today's world religions, which emphasize regular worship in spatial temples, churches, mosques, and synagogues. The findings were striking. This diagram shows the results of our efforts to compare the sample of 49 archaeological sites from Western Asia spanning the agricultural transition. Archaeologists generally showed more ancient phases at the bottom of their diagrams, corresponding to the lower levels at which all the objects are unearthed, and more recent phases at the top, where objects in the ground are generally found nearer to the surface. So the most ancient level depicted here is the Epipaleolithic. Epipaleolithic.
Epipaleolithic.
Epipaleolithic. The very final throes.
Throes
of Paleolithic era before the invention of farming, when all humans subsists on wild foods, and in between are various periods described as PPN, pre-pottery Neolithic, divided into phases A, B, C, and or PM, pottery Neolithic, when parts have finally been invented. During the Epipaleolithic period, the light gray coloration indicates that according to Gantley's statistical analysis, ancient foraging cultures were predominantly imagistic. They were bound together by rare emotionally intense rituals. By contrast, the most recent periods of the Neolithic at the top of the diagram, marked in dark gray, when agricultures were established, had the most in common with modern societies. They adopted more routinized rituals with all their potentials to bind together larger groups of people. During the transition from imagistic to doctrinal modes, we found some more indeterminate practices, medium gray. This provided quantitative evidence. Quantitative. This provided quantitative evidence that ritual was becoming more routinized during the agricultural transition, not only at Çatalhöyük but across the much wider region.